Welcome back. You're watching World News, and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth met with his Polish counterpart Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, and he's about to meet with President Andrzej Duda in Warsaw on Friday. Hegseth flew to Poland on Thursday after telling NATO defense ministers in Brussels that Europe should be primarily responsible for defense on the continent. Hegseth will discuss bilateral defense cooperation between the two countries and need for continued deterrence efforts along NATO's eastern flank. And this is exactly that discussion which you can currently see on your screens between Mr. Hegseth and Mr. Kosiniak-Kamysz. The U.S. has highlighted Poland's leadership as a model ally in defense investment and burden sharing in NATO. Hegseth is also about to visit U.S. troops stationed in Poland to discuss the critical role in the region. The European Commission has blasted a recent reciprocal trade decision by U.S. President Donald Trump as a step in the wrong direction. The condemnation comes as the beginning of a trade war between the Atlantic powers continues to simmer. EU correspondent Angela Skujins joins us from Brussels. Hello, Angela. So what prompted this response from the EU executive?
Yes, so US President Donald Trump overnight signed a presidential memorandum asking his trade chiefs to conduct reviews of how the US conducts trade with its partners. The US president mentioned reciprocal tariffs being slapped onto the EU, who took particular aim at the EU's value-added tax system. Here is what he had to say about that from the White House.
For purposes of this United States policy, which is a big one, we will consider countries that use the VAT system. You know, you hear about a VAT tax all the time, the VAT system, which is far more punitive, actually, than a tariff. Similar, but more punitive. To be similar so that the way we're going to look at it, we're going to call it a tariff, because they use that as a way of getting away from the tariff and the designation of tariff, but it's essentially similar or the same thing.
Yes, so the European Commission responded this morning with their own statement. They said this was a step in the wrong direction and they would examine their own actions in terms of how they could respond to this decision from the US President Donald Trump. But this is only one chapter in an escalating trade simmer. US President Donald Trump at the beginning of the week slapped 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium, with that expected to come into effect from March. These new reciprocal tariffs could be implemented from April, but we're expecting a more developed statement from the European Commission, and when that comes in, we'll be reporting on that for you. But that is all from Brussels, and I'll send it back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much. That was Angela Skujins reporting from Brussels. World leaders are gathering in Munich for the city's annual high-powered security conference as U.S. President Donald Trump pushes for a peace deal in Ukraine. Trump's second-in-command, J.D. Vance, is in Germany alongside Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg. Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Damon, is there and joins us now. So what's the mood so far? We've spoken before. What has changed, and what are we yet to expect today?
Good morning, Claudia. In just over an hour's time, this show officially gets on the road, but that does not mean this morning has been quiet. In fact, I see to Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, the Vice President. He is here in Munich. He is here at the Hotel Bayerischer Hof, and he has already sat down with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. As Angela mentioned there, Trump is certainly hitting out at the EU. He's telling these European leaders that, well, Europe needs to do more heavy lifting. This is some of what he told us.
As you all know, one of the things that the President and I really believe is that Europe is, of course, a very important ally for the United States. We also think it's really important to recognize that in the future, we think Europe is going to have to take a bigger role in its own security, and obviously Germany, being the biggest economy in Europe, is going to have a major role to play there, and so I'm sure we'll talk about that as well.
Now, of course, J.D. Vance is set to address the conference this afternoon. Volodymyr Zelensky will do the same tomorrow, but the pair are set to meet today. And we've just had to hand, we're hearing reports that around 5 p.m. Central Eastern Time, that meeting will take place. So keep your eyes and ears peeled. 5 p.m. Central Eastern Time is when we're told, when we're hearing that J.D. Vance will sit face to face with Volodymyr Zelensky. Of course, Donald Trump really set a cat among the pigeons by calling Vladimir Putin direct this week. That has changed the mode of diplomacy. It has changed the way that this conference will play out from those diplomatic relations to the political side of things that will emerge over the coming days. And Moscow, we're told, will not be here. They say they haven't been invited. That's according to a spokesperson also just moments ago. And Volodymyr Zelensky also in the last few minutes has addressed media saying that he does not believe the US has a peace plan yet. So we will see over the coming hours, the coming days, the coming weeks, whether that will change. Claudia.
Thank you so much. That was Aaron Damon reporting to us live from the Munich Security Conference. And now from Munich, we are moving to Warsaw. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is in the Polish capital today. This visit follows Hegseth attending a meeting of NATO defense ministers earlier this week. Our reporter Paweł Trzaskowski is on site. So Paweł, what can we expect from today's meeting? What have we heard so far? Give us an update.
Well, first of all, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, started the press conference by underscoring the ironclad relations that Poland and the U.S. are enjoying at the moment, the best relations possibly in both countries' history. And Hegseth said that other European NATO countries should be like Poland, that they should invest a lot in their defense, like Poland is currently spending 5% of its GDP on defense, because he said that Europe cannot have the perception that the US forces will be on the continent forever, and that only a strong deterrence and hard power will guarantee a lasting peace in the region.
Thank you so much. That was Paweł Trzaskowski reporting live from Warsaw. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that EU and NATO countries must increase their financial contributions to support Ukraine. He also claimed that the U.S. is bearing a financial burden of $200 billion more than Ukraine's other allies, and that these countries need to equalize payments. Trump's statement follows his call with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
We want to have them put up more money. They have to do that. At the same time, we had a very good conversation with President Putin yesterday, and we also had a very good conversation. I did in both cases with President Zelensky, and I think we're going to be able to do something. I think we're going to be able to make a deal. But as far as the negotiation, it's too early to say what's going to happen. Maybe Russia will give up a lot, maybe they won't, and it's all dependent on what is going to happen. The negotiation really hasn't started.
On Thursday, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said that America would hit Moscow with sanctions should Vladimir Putin not agree to a peace deal with Ukraine. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Vance floated the idea of sending American troops to Ukraine if Moscow fails to negotiate in good faith.
Vance struck a far tougher tone than his colleague US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who suggested that the US will not commit its military to ensure peace in Ukraine. In the interview, the Vice President claimed that the US has economic tools of leverage and will use its military tools if the situation demands it. J.D. Vance's remarks came a day before his meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky at the Munich Security Conference. The American Vice President is also scheduled to speak with allied leaders, whom he intends to tell that they are stifling free speech and democracy by not working with populist parties.
Speaking to the Financial Times, Emmanuel Macron has said that only the Ukrainian president can negotiate on behalf of his country with Russia. The French leader went on to say that a peace that is capitulation would be bad news for everyone, the US included.
In the interview, Macron asked whether Vladimir Putin is genuinely, sustainably and credibly interested in a ceasefire deal, and added that if he is, then it is up to the Ukrainians to negotiate with the Kremlin. These remarks come after US President Donald Trump separately discussed the war with Russian and Ukrainian officials and told his administration to open talks on ending the conflict. The phone calls followed US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth telling Ukraine's allies that return to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders was unrealistic, and he does not see it as part of NATO in the coming future. Additionally, Macron told the Financial Times that Donald Trump had created a window of opportunity for a negotiated solution to the war, and at the same time, the French leader said it is now up to Volodymyr Zelensky to discuss territorial and sovereignty issues.
The Russian army struck the Chernobyl power plant with an attack drone on Thursday night. The high-explosive warhead hit the containment unit covering up reactor 4 of the plant. This is the same reactor which exploded in 1986, causing the largest radiological incident in history.
In a statement on X, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wrote that the shelter over reactor 4 was damaged by the attack. The strike sparked a fire which had to be extinguished by fire crews. Radiation levels are currently stable and are being constantly monitored. According to an initial assessment of the situation, the damage to the protective shell around reactor 4 is significant.
And so this marked the end of our service, but please do stay tuned. Back in just a moment here on TVP World with more news and features.